Welcome to the Damascus Road podcast. On the road to Damascus, Paul had a radical encounter with Jesus and his life was changed forever. That is what we hope and pray for here. Now, on to this week's episode.
Welcome to week 4 of our series on the seasons of life according to the book of Ecclesiastes. This is the last one, winter, where everything is cold, barren, and dead. When nights are long, days are short, and sometimes the sun doesn't make an appearance at all, leading to seasonal depression and famine. We have a bit less of this here in Tucson when the sun shines year-round, and frankly, we welcome some cooler temperatures after enduring 9 months of heat. But what I'm talking about is what the snowbirds are fleeing from when they come here. Real winter, when the wildlife hibernate. The leaves have fallen from the trees, and most days are not the picturesque white winter wonderland, but usually a dreary gray, day after day. I've been asked after growing up in Chicago if I'll ever leave Tucson, and my answer isn't exactly no. It's I don't think I can handle winter anymore after being here for 16 years. Visiting is fun when there's snow, but for those of you who haven't done winter up north, it sucks. There's shoveling driveways, scraping off windshields, and eventually you just end up dreaming about spring arriving. It does have Christmas, but after that it can be really long, hard, and wearisome. Again, seasonal depression is a real thing. Thankfully, here at Damascus Road, we can plan ahead and choose the best speaker for each topic. So that means that a discussion must have occurred when assigning topics to teachers about who really embodies this season of boredom, hibernation, and hopelessness. Who is wasting away physically and mentally and can serve as a live visual aid for this topic? The result of this imagined debate stands before you now, deeply offended. There's a lot to be said for healthy conflict resolution. We've done a whole series on it. None of it will be said or practiced now. If this were a pickup basketball game, I would take my ball and go home. But Brad, didn't you choose to speak on this topic or this week? Didn't you volunteer? The truth is, I don't remember, which unfortunately only lends support to the idea that I'm the perfect choice to speak about winter and the end of things because I can't even remember if it truly makes sense for me to be offended. And even better, I've chosen not to care, to be offended anyway, and I've chosen to tell all of you people about how I have been wronged. Now, I'm mostly kidding. Chances are I chose this of the 4 options. I wasn't kidding about not remembering that part. But if I were choosing between teaching on the 4 seasons, I do think I would choose winter to speak on. Why? Not because I like winter outside of Tucson. It's rough. Skiing is awesome, but that's about it. I think it's because there is a lot to be learned at the end of things, when times are hard and when our lives are transitioning. Sure, summer is great. Who doesn't love summer? Well, other than people in Tucson where it's ungodly hot. But summer in general is a time of fun and adventure, but it isn't when things are great and sunny in life that we learn and grow. Again, I like the good times, but if I'm going to teach, with winter there's built-in reflection, wisdom, and willingness to change when things are hard. Also, it allows me to use a near-perfect analogy from one of my favorite books. Well, maybe 2. One I already did without naming it. My earlier characterization of winter stole heavily from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, with C.S. Lewis's perfect description of the reign of the White Witch, that it's always winter and never Christmas, which is very good, especially when you are a young child growing up in a real winter part of the world. The second is a more recent trek into fantasy literature and television where the seasons play an important role, with winter being the chief among them. A Song of Ice and Fire, or as they are more commonly known by the television adaptation, A Game of Thrones. Now, disclaimer that is needed. Brad very much enjoys these books and shows. They are, however, a hard R or a hard TVMA, as the case may be. While I think the story is riveting, the world building is fantastic, it does not get any kind of endorsement for being good for your soul. However, what we are talking about today from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible is very spot on with one bit from this piece of literature, which I will unpack for those of you who have neither read nor watched, possibly wisely, or who just need a refresher. Now, in this fictional world, seasons do not last a specific amount of time like they do here. They instead can last for years and years. Summer may stretch for 2 months or 2 years or 10 years or more, and the same is true of winter. And when the winter is long and stretches for many years, as would be the case in our world, there is cold, hunger, and famine. And as we learn as the story unfolds, there are also old evils that only threaten during these long winters. And when it has been a long time since the most recent long winter, people tend to forget about what comes south as the winter stretches on, like evil undead snowbirds. These are threats their ancestors fought but didn't fully destroy, and the people begin to believe that they are little more than fairy tales made to scare children. Well, not everyone forgets. There is one house, House Stark, whose words could have been plucked right out of our series from the wisdom literature of the Bible. They remind themselves to be ready by repeating, "Winter is coming," so that even in times of plenty, during the long summers, they prepare for the cold, they prepare for the hardship, and they remind themselves to be ready for winter. And this is essentially what we are talking about today from the book of Ecclesiastes, and arguably what the teacher Solomon has been talking about throughout the entire time in this book. You could even say it's a central theme to what he is saying. The closest we see to winter is coming in the book of Ecclesiastes is when it says, "It's better to spend your life at funerals than at parties. After all, everyone dies. So the living should take this to heart. A wise person thinks a lot about death, while a fool thinks only about having a good time." Here, much like the Starks, the teacher is advising us to keep our end in mind while we live, that in the end we will die, that things don't last, and that things we find to be so very important one day will be meaningless as the seasons change. He says that the wise will dwell on this fact while the fools will ignore it. So I guess we should think about death all the time. Well, not exactly. This applies to a lot of other changes in our lives too, big and small. Right now, the semester's ending. For some, that means just the end of a school year and going into the summer. For others, it can mean that school's over entirely and the real life is looming, or the real world is looming. It could mean a change with your career that's happening, losing a job unexpectedly, or even leaving on purpose on your own terms, even planned in advance. Still, that major change can be really scary. It could be the end of a marriage, the end of a relationship or a friendship, or even some changes that are generally positive but still scary in some ways, like having children, getting married, or retiring. Sometimes the winter in our lives isn't driven by circumstances at all. It's just that we feel like an end is coming, or that something needs to change and we don't know what it is. All of these are the ends of a period of our lives and represent the conclusion of a cycle and signal the coming beginning of a new cycle. And this is where some of the lessons we can learn by thinking about death, as Ecclesiastes instructs, can really help us live the life we want instead of ending up in a life that we feel trapped in. And really, this is what a lot of Ecclesiastes is about and what our series based on it has been about. How do we live well in the various stages of life? And today we're going to explore this from the passages that focus on endings and often death. But it's not about how to mourn or how to write a will. It's about learning how to live well using the end as a lens and a helpful perspective. It really gets to one of the big questions. What is the purpose of our life here? Or what should we be doing with our time here on earth? And as promised, in Ecclesiastes, we're going to start by talking about death. And we'll start at the beginning with what Solomon starts the whole book with. His statement, which he repeats in various forms, is, "Everything is meaningless, completely meaningless." All right, so he says that a lot. When we dig a couple layers deeper when reading through the whole book on why things are meaningless, we see the following two examples that I think are representative. The first one says, "Yet I saw that the wise and the foolish share the same fate. Both will die. So I said to myself, since I will end up the same as the fool, what's the value of all my wisdom? This is all so meaningless, for the wise and the foolish both die. The wise will not be remembered any longer than the fool. In the days to come, both will be forgotten." And the second one, "I also thought about the human condition, how God proves to people that they are like animals. For people and animals share the same fate. Both breathe and both must die. How meaningless. Both go to the same place. They came from dust and they return to dust." And there's more like this. It's a main theme throughout the book of Ecclesiastes is that everything is meaningless because everyone shares the same fate. We all die. We won't be remembered long. All of our time here on earth amounts to no more than chasing after the wind. Now, I believe that at least in part what Solomon is doing throughout this book is rhetoric. He's making a point through hyperbole. Some quick evidence that I don't think he really thinks everything is meaningless. Outside of the first 3 weeks of this series, never ending with saying that everything's meaningless. But 2 just more logical things are, first, he never says, well, let's just all give up, or even something more like, do whatever you want, it doesn't matter anyway. Philosophies that really think there's no God or everything is meaningless will generally go to one of those 2 places. And second, there actually are things that he advocates for as having some amount of meaning. That they don't seem to fall into this meaningless category. And we'll get to these. It's a shorter list than everything that he says is meaningless, but they do exist. All right, so what is the grand point then that Solomon is making with all of this talk and this rhetoric about our futility the futility of our time here on earth? I think his point is better understood with keeping the end of life in mind. It's not that everything is exactly meaningless, but what good is it to prize wisdom or material possessions or pleasure is his question. What good is it to be proud of being better than other people, better than fools, or better than animals? In the end, we all return to dust, so why are you focused on these things? I would read a lot of these meaningless statements when he says something is meaningless as you go through this book, as these things aren't what is most important. They aren't what is worth spending your life pursuing. This is Solomon with the wisdom of age, looking back on the various pursuits of a busy life and saying that none of it ultimately matters when you get to the end. And Solomon, he doesn't actually mean that it makes no difference whether you are wise and live life well, or whether you are a fool and live it poorly. After all, the entire purpose of him writing this book is to help people live better lives, to be more wise. His point, again, is one of a reminder about death and what it all means in the end. He says, the living at least know they will die, but the dead know nothing. They have no further reward, nor are they remembered. Whatever they did in their lifetime, loving, hating, envying, is all long gone. They no longer play a part in anything here on earth. Another pretty bleak outlook. So if Solomon is telling us to remember that the end is coming and to think about what really matters in life in light of that, what does he say we should live for then? What is his grand answer to the big question we mentioned earlier? What is the purpose of life? Where can we find real meaning in the book about everything that is meaningless? All right, I'm going to make some lists. This will serve as a bit of a summary and recap of what we've done in the series so far. First, and this is after me reading through the entire book and writing all these things down. The first is a list of things Solomon tells us are meaningless, other than everything, which is how we started. Again, read this list as meaningless in an ultimate sense, like a list of not the thing to build your life around. It's a fairly long list. You'll be able to read all of them. I'm just going to read about half. Some of them include wisdom and knowledge, pleasure, working hard to build up your possessions, political power, thinking that wealth will bring true happiness, rich people dying young before they can enjoy their wealth, dreaming about nice things instead of enjoying what you have. So Solomon is saying not to spend your life pursuing money, wisdom, pleasure, political power, building up possessions, or dreaming about what you don't have. And before we move on to what we should focus on, take a look at this list and see if there's anything on there that kind of strikes you that you take a little offense at, or that you feel like should not be on the meaningless list. I have 2 on there. I don't know that I have them in an ultimate problematic place, but I do work hard to build up possessions. Not necessarily like cars or vacation homes, but I do get a little too keyed in on my investment accounts, retirement accounts, and the like. And it has not been good lately. The other one for me is highly valuing wisdom and knowledge. And this is really hard because I think wisdom and knowledge are good. But I probably value my identity as someone who is educated, wise, level-headed, a little bit too much. arguably, it would be better to be known as always loving, compassionate, and generous than reasonable and logical. And this also points out that there are things on this list here that are good in a lot of ways. Being wise, as we mentioned, is probably better than being a fool. But then there's also things on here that are, not good at all, like injustice of the legal system or finding no satisfaction in life. And it's really interesting that in Solomon's examination of life, all in these lists of things that are called meaningless, that there are these differences. There are things that are seemingly completely bad and ones that just aren't the best. All right, now for the better list. What does Solomon say we should be living for that is worthwhile and that we should pursue with our lives? Again, I think this will be a review of prior weeks, at least for the first couple, because they are kind of a refrain throughout Ecclesiastes. First, enjoy food and drink and find satisfaction in your work, or be content. Enjoy the fruits of your labor. He says that companionship with two or three people is a good thing. He says to live happily with the woman or man you love, your wife or husband. He says approaching God with your ears open and your mouth shut is a good thing. And he says to remember your Creator or to fear God several times. And I really like this list, but I want to group things a little bit and summarize. This list is much less directly worded from Ecclesiastes, but I do think they are categories that those things fit into. So I boiled it down to three. The first one is choose contentment and find pleasure in your normal life. The second one, live your life with and love other people. And the third one is remember God and humble yourself before Him. This is what I have boiled down all of the words of Solomon in Ecclesiastes to. If you're trying to trace the two lists, it's really two per. So the first two in the 6-item list go into the first one. The next two go in the second one. The last two go in the last one. And normally I would spend time unpacking all these, but I think the first one was covered very well previously in our series. So if you didn't catch all those, you can go back and watch or listen to them. Like I mentioned in the first list, the whole eat, drink, and find satisfaction in your work is a refrain throughout Ecclesiastes. I'll just say on that a large amount of happiness in life is about your attitude and choosing to be content, choosing to notice what is good in life and to be thankful for those things instead of feeling like you always need more or need something different. Now for the next two, which I'll spend more time on, I want to hearken us back to the season of life that we're talking about, which is winter, when our cycles are coming to an end. And we talked earlier about how Solomon counseled us to think about death, to think about it often, to be wise. And the way that makes sense to me with this is to think about what will still matter when we get to the end of your life. Will it be how much money is in your accounts, how cool your car is, how many followers you amassed on social media? Will it be how prestigious your job was, or how smart you were, or how smart you got other people to think you were? Thinking about this now, and when we reach these kind of transition points, is all about reorienting our life so that we can get it to be what we want in the end, to be centered around the important things. Now, I mean, when I think about death and the end of things, my most memorable and impactful experience has been when my mom passed away 5 years ago. She had pancreatic cancer, and while we were definitely praying for her to be healed and recovered, we were also very aware of what the outlook was, and it was quite bad and leading towards death. My mom and dad knew this, and as a result, they purposely chose how to spend her last weeks and months. They took all of their kids and their grandkids to Disneyland and Universal in California. My parents came down for Zane's birthday about a month before my mom passed away. After spending time with us, they went and visited their best friends who lived out in Pennsylvania and then in Florida. And when my mom knew her time was short, she chose to spend time with family and friends. And despite this, I remember thinking, because I knew my mom was likely passing, that she would give me some life-altering advice in her last days. Something about what I should be doing with my life that I thought would be related to my work, or something that would be like a grand purpose or ministry. And what she actually said to me was to love my kids and to raise them well. She didn't say to save the world or to leave my job and do ministry full time, which I was pretty sure I would have if she said that I should at that point. What she actually said to me was to love my kids. And this is a illustration of the second one on that list of what is important to focus on in life. The thing that is important is loving other people. This is one of the great purposes in our lives. It's not our things and our possessions that will last, but we will last and the people around us will last. And I generally think about prioritizing people over accomplishments or possessions as an investment in things that are eternal instead of things that are fleeting. I believe this is what my mom meant, and I think it was also her saying to me that the most important thing she did in her life was raising and loving me and my brothers, and was telling me to do the same thing. This also brings to mind a passage of Jesus' teaching in the book of Matthew, where he says, "Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moths eat them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. Store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will also be." And there are several things that fall into the treasures in heaven category, but for me, other people and my family have always been kind of at the top of the list. People are eternal. Our possessions, our jobs, our clothes, and what we post on the internet are not. There is a part of us that lives on beyond death, and we would do well in our lives to put how we love and interact with other eternal people as one of our main purposes. So what does this all mean as we come into these endings of cycles in our lives? The graduations, the ends of school years, ends of jobs, or any other season. Well, as we think about what will come next, and as we have a potential break in the busyness of normal life that we categorized as the seasons of spring, summer, and autumn, try to think about how we can prioritize other people in our lives. One thing that I know now, and that seems obvious, but I did not get at all when I was in college or in high school, is how many of my friendships really didn't require effort because we were in the same place and went to the same events. When you move on, it turns out that maintaining these relationships requires effort. So to kind of show this, I recently went on a weekend trip up in Phoenix with some guys I went to high school with. And it was interesting because it's actually my good friend from college, Colin's group of close friends. I was definitely friendly with all of them in high school, but not kind of a core part of their group. And that weekend really made it clear to me that I had lost touch with basically all of my best friends from high school. And this group clearly hadn't lost touch. And seeing these lifelong friendships and what they still meant to each other was really powerful. So as you go through endings and then new beginnings, or really just go through life, remember to schedule time for the people you want to have in your life. Block off time in your days, weeks, months, or years to stay connected and to grow those important friendships. And most importantly here, it's okay and good to be the one who reaches out and prioritizes the relationship. Zane, my middle school son, tells me that in middle school, people don't really hang out at people's houses or like in person, which I think means everyone is too scared to be the one to invite someone to do something real. Don't be like a middle schooler who only interacts on Snapchat. And there are a couple of authors that write good stuff on this. The two I remember most are Bob Goff and Shauna Niequist. I assume for Bob Goff it must have been in Love Does, and for Shauna in Present Over Perfect, since those are the books I've read by each. Or let's be honest, I listen to them on Audible. But one of the main ideas in both is to prioritize the people who will be around you in your last days when you're on your deathbed. And that kind of is the same lens that we're looking at with Ecclesiastes, and it gives a lot of clarity about what matters in life. It's your kids, your spouse, your family, and your closest friends. And kind of what they're getting at is not to neglect those relationships or put other things over them, or you can end up at the end of your life and there are not many people around. And this reflecting back on life from a deathbed perspective gets at what we often do in the real life season of winter too. In winter, as long as it's not Narnia during the reign of the White Witch, there is Christmas. and to a lesser extent, Thanksgiving and New Year's. We often spend time with our family over these holidays. We take breaks from work and school, and we reflect back on our year and on our lives and make goals of what we want to do differently in the form of New Year's resolutions. We also have Christmas parties, New Year's Eve parties, and generally just tend to get together more often during the otherwise dreary winter season. It's like the end of the year and the cold and bleak weather helps us realize our need for connection and for what is really important in life. All right, one more. Remembering God and humbling yourself before Him. Now, to link this to the last one, I'm going to connect Solomon's teaching in Ecclesiastes to Jesus' summary of the teachings of the law. He says, and this is from the book of Matthew, he's asked, "Teacher, what is the most important commandment in the law of Moses?" And Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments." Now, I think it's kind of going through Ecclesiastes. I think it's really interesting and cool that despite how kind of depressing Ecclesiastes can be, saying everything's meaningless, that when you push at what the real takeaways are, there's strong consistency with Jesus' teaching and with the rest of the Old Testament. So from this, the other thing we should remember when we're faced with these endings in our lives or the cycles in our throughout our life, or even the very real end that will come for all of us in death, is that we should remember to prioritize spending time with God. When the death end is coming, even if our bodies are failing, and if we have trouble communicating and we're lonely, if our friends are gone, we can still spend time with God. The same is true if we move on from college or a job and we feel alone or inadequate or apprehensive about things. Even if our friends and family are not around, God is. And I do not mean to say that God is all we need. I think this passage, and if you read through the Bible, pretty clearly points out that we are meant to live life in community and with other people. But we don't need to be completely alone. At these times of endings during winter, I think it becomes very clear how much we need God. When times are hard and when the end is near, people remember God. The takeaway for today is that when we may not be, or for a lot of us, we may not be in a winter season of life, or if we are, it's likely not the rock bottom type of situation where our need for God is painfully clear. So the takeaway now is that this need for God is there during all of the seasons. When things are new and exciting in spring and we are distracted by the beauty around us, we need God then. When it is summer and there's adventure, road trips, vacation, summer camps, and spiritual highs, we need God at those points. And when we are hard at work in the autumn of life, harvesting, being productive, and drinking pumpkin spice lattes, we need God, especially with the pumpkin spice lattes. Winter shows us the truth of our lives, and often by pointing out how we have gotten off course through the easier seasons. The truth is that we need to prioritize the other people in our lives. We need to love people and develop those key relationships. And the other truth is that we need God. Oh yeah, I made a list of these 3 things earlier. To close, I want to bring that back up. And for some theatrics, you can say to Solomon, "Teacher, if everything is meaningless, a chasing after the wind, what should we do with our short time here on this earth?" The abridged answer is to choose contentment and find pleasure in your normal life. Live life with and love other people, and remember God and humble yourself before Him. I pray that we would make the choice to live this way, that as we face endings and as we think of winter and of death, that we would choose a life like this, and that we would choose to live lives dripping with eternal meaning in a world that is trying to get us to focus on things that are meaningless, that are a chasing after the wind. Dear God, I thank you. I thank you for the words of wisdom that you give us in the Bible and in Ecclesiastes, and even sprinkled in culture around us, God. I thank you for reminders that we need you and to live our lives with other people, God. I thank you that you are here with us, that you want us to be with you, Lord. We love you, God. Pray all these things in your holy name. Amen.
thank you for joining the Damascus Road podcast. Our mission is to follow Jesus together by being with God, loving everyone, transforming people, developing leaders, growing new ministries, and changing the world. You can find out more about us online at DamascusRoadTucson.com.